happy to be in Sitka. My name, as Melissa said, is Dzijuksuk. That's my Tlingit name, and I've actually started introducing myself with my Tlingit name first and then my English name, just to change things up a little bit. My English name is Debra O'Gara. I am Tlingit, Yupik, and Irish, and I'm a Raven from the Teton clan, and I currently live in Petersburg. And I'm sorry for those of you on Zoom, I think you're going to be seeing my profile because I'm talking to the folks that are in front of me. But in a minute, I'm going to share the screen. So first I'm going to just introduce myself and let you know who I am. And then we'll get on to talking about Tillie Paul Tamaree, who was my great-grandmother. So a little bit about myself. My mom and auntie have been and continue to be two of the most influential women in my life. Joan Bejo is my aunt. She lives in Bellingham. And my mom, Carol O'Gara, lives in Juneau. They were both born and raised in Mountain Village, which is up in the Yukon Delta, which is getting slammed with a storm right now. And I hope everybody's as safe as can be. They helped me to find my place in this world. And I soon discovered, and it has never failed me yet, that my place in the world continually changes. But they helped me to have a good balance so that I know how to shift. Their mother, my grandmother, was Frances Tamaree Shepherd, and she was born in Wrangell and unfortunately died before I had a chance to meet her and was way too young to go. My grandfather was George Shepherd, who was born and raised in St. Michael, and he was a trader and eventually settled in the YK Delta when he married my grandmother. My great-grandmother was Tillie Paul Tamaree, who you'll learn a little bit more about her. She was a civil rights activist, and she was also the mother to William and Louis Paul, who this talk is not about, but we could do a whole hour lecture on one or both of them. Tillie Paul, as she became known, her full name was Matilda, but she became known as Tillie. She built bridges between the Tlingit ways and Western Christian teachings. Tillie's second husband, my great-grandfather, was William Tamaree. He was a community leader and a peacemaker and a carver, and he was also from Wrangell. My family is a mixture of fighters, survivors, and victims with education, success in law, government, and church. There is also alcoholism, violence, challenges, and trauma in my family. And my family and my life has been a rocky journey that eventually became safe, comfortable, and filled with joy. I've learned to weave, which you can see for those of you who are sitting here in the lobby with me, and I'm here weaving at Sheldon Jackson Museum for the next 3 weeks. This I consider to be the art of my ancestors. I have learned in the last 15 years how to weave spruce root, cedar bark basketry, and most recently, raven's tail and shellcat. Through this gift, I have found sobriety and an ever-growing circle of strong women and other two-spirited weavers. And together we share stories, lessons, mistakes, and our victories. And sometimes with weaving, especially, victory is not having to take out too many rows or learning the lessons that we learn as we take out rows and then put them back in. We connect through our weaving with each other, but more importantly, we connect with our ancestors. A little bit about my clan, the Teton clan, which is a Raven clan out of Wrangell. It's very small and almost became non-existent. There's some over the last generation before mine who actually claimed membership in the Kahtahah clan because the Teton was so small. It was much easier to belong to a clan than a really small one that wasn't meeting or doing anything. So, but recently in the last 10, 15 years, we have been meeting and growing and participating in ceremony and gatherings. And I hope, this is just my hope with my weaving, that someday we can reclaim some of our chilkat weavings, which tell stories themselves. And again, I'm not here to talk about my weaving. I'm here to talk about Tillie Paul. So before I get started on that, I want to share, let's see if I can do this. Robert, share screen. And Robert, I'm not seeing the desktop on the shared screen.
Let's see.
I know you put it on the desktop. There it is. Now it's open and go back to.
Let's see here.
We have to get back to Zoom. There we go.
Yeah, here, is that it?
Yep. And
It
share
is.
screen. There we go. Thank you all for being patient. Welcome.
There you go.
All right, and then
You can use
this
yeah.
one.
Uh-huh.
All right. All right. This is going to be a real brief whirlwind tour through Tillie Paul Tamaree's life. And I'm going to hit on some of the, I'm going to try not to ad lib too much, but for those of you who know me, I do ad lib. So hopefully I want to save some time at the end for any questions. But I'm going to go through chronologically. Matilda Kennan Paul Tamaree was born, by best guesses, on January 18, 1863, in what we call today Victoria, BC. Tillie's father was Scottish, and believed that, and this Scottish man who was Tillie's father, he believed that children should be shipped off to Scotland to be educated. And he had both Tillie and her sister, who was named Margaret. However, Tillie's Teton Tlingit mother was not having any of that and was horribly horrified about the prospect of shipping her two daughters off across the ocean. So Tillie's mom, who by the time the girls were of the age to be entering school, had already developed tuberculosis and was getting sick, and she could tell she was getting sick fairly quickly. So Tillie's mom formed a plan to get Tillie and Margaret out of Vancouver Island, where Victoria is, and back up north to Tlingit country, where they could be raised and live with relatives. A young Tlingit man who had been south for the purposes of trading agreed to help transport them. And he was a young man, but he turned out to be a nephew of Chief Shakes, who had the nickname of Snook. And Snook lived at the time, and actually I think that's where he lived for most of his life, in what we call now Wrangell, up on the Stikine country. Now imagine this journey in a very, very small canoe, because this young man had just come down for trading purposes, right? So he wasn't in a big, huge family-sized canoe. It was a very small canoe. And he agreed to take a sick woman and her two young children. And from Vancouver Island, the south end of Vancouver Island, all the way up through the Inside Passage. So you can imagine this trip. Now we do that trip these days in the ferry or on a cruise ship or some people have money in a yacht, but this was paddling. And because they were running away from Tillie's mom's husband and the girls' father, they traveled by night. which made the journey even more dangerous. And I'm going to be reading some things from Nora and Richard Dunauer's book that if you don't already have it, I encourage you to get it. I don't know what that beat was, but I'm going to ignore it. So there's some sections in here that I want to just read because they read it, they say it so much better. And there's a whole chapter on Tillie Paul Tamaree in here, as well as her son, which I'll talk about him in a minute. So about the trip. So this Indian mother quietly fled, and this is a quote from one of Tillie's daughter-in-laws later on in life, who's trying to write down Tillie's life story. So this Indian mother quietly fled one dark night in a small canoe manned by her clan brother and journeyed 600 miles back home to raise the children with her family. She said, paddling through uncharted waters through territory inhabited by hostile Indians who were always on guard against raids and the warlike Sitka tribe to which Matilda belonged. They traveled from eventide to early dawn, and for safety, they stashed their canoe in the woods and built fires in the driest wood to minimize smoke while awaiting the covering darkness in order to stay undercover and not be caught. Now, as you know, through the story, because they made it safely, everybody arrived safely, and the girls were welcomed. They were welcomed in by their maternal family. They were given Tlingit names, and initially were placed in the home of a maternal aunt who happened to also be married to Chief Shakes or Snook. That's where Tillie went. Her sister Margaret actually went and lived with another family with a maternal uncle. The name that was given to Tillie was a name that the Tlingit name that was given to Tillie was a name that she couldn't pronounce very easily. And so she actually, a simpler version of it was Kahtahah, which is the name that she is known by today still. And I just want to share with you, and this is for, I don't know if folks, when I'm not sharing screen, I'll hold this book up. But this is a children's book that Tillie's daughter-in-law, who was married to one of her sons, wrote. And it's the life story of Kahtahah when she was a small girl up until, and it was really to tell some of the old ways and also the changes of traditional Tlingit ways melding and being covered up or enveloped as it would be with the white ways and Christianity that was coming in. But it's a great book, and it was illustrated by Ray Munoz, and as you can see, mine is actually falling apart. And I don't know if they reprinted this book or not, but I've had it for a number of years. All right, back to they arrived in Wrangell. Soon after they arrived, got the girls settled into respective homes with family members who could raise them. Her mother died, succumbed to the tuberculosis. Much of Kahtahah's early childhood was filled with joy, summer camp, berry picking, and essentially life was good. It was a small native village that did not have a lot of Christian influences, did not have a lot of traders coming in and out. It was really, it was unlike Sitka was during the same time period. Certainly was much different than what Victoria was, where they had just come from. So it didn't stay all good for too long, though, because Kahtahah also contracted TB. And and it became pretty advanced. Finally, when all else, remember she's living with Snook at this time, his family at this time. Finally, when all else failed, Snook called in a shaman who, again, because this was a more rural, insulated or isolated, as some folks might call, I prefer insulated community, there was still shamans. And this shaman, Squindy, who also happened to be her uncle, was called in to help provide some treatment for this disease that was slowly killing her. After preparing fasting, Kahtahah was brought to Squindy, who chanted and shook his rattle and placed a necklace of bones around her neck and did other such things as shamans did and or do for healing and treatments. It was then that the shaman declared that Kahtahah would not die. She did stay sick for a little while, but she would not die, and that she would actually, and this was his prophecy, that she would grow to be at very old age, have lots of children. And he also said that she had special work to do and would be well loved by her people. He also stated that her name, Kahtahah, was usually a man's name, and that she would likely do men's work. And that's baffled some members of my family. But if you think about what she has done, she did things that women didn't normally do in a Western civilization. So maybe that's where that came from. We're not sure. And Kahtahah did indeed grow to be well into her 90s, and all of the prophecies came true. As Tillie grew older, she survived and got better, and the TB was done. And maybe I can switch here. I have a series of, I don't want to jump ahead. We'll stay on old Tillie for a while. All right, as Tillie grew older, she caught the attention of several young men and several suitors who came calling. But Snook, who at this time is her guardian, was really opposed to Christianity and the white man's ways. And he refused to send Kahtahah to the new Christian school that had just opened up there in Wrangell. Instead, but he also knew that there was some young men who were coming around, so he needed to do something. So he instead arranged a marriage for her with a Tsimshian chief who was from Metlakatla. And Kahtahah was sent down there to live in that community and get to know the individual who she was to marry. And she went and was sent there to live, but would not be forced into marriage. She would only marry if she consented. So she went down there to check it out, to see what would happen. And she was given a place to live with a family that was nearby. Now, times were different then. She was 12 years old when this was all happening. And it didn't take very long for it to become clear to Tillie that there was no way she was going to consent to marrying this man who hadn't caught her attention whatsoever and was much older than she was. Plus, it was not in her own home. It wasn't in her community. So she was not consenting. So rather than going back home, she was actually placed in the home or went to live in the home of a minister in the Methodist Church. And she lived there for a couple of years, and it was there that she began to learn English. So here she is, 12, 13, and I think 14. So she was there for 2 or 3 years and is just now learning English. And as many of the books and articles and renditions of her life say, that she learned the white civilized ways. She was also given a Christian name of Sarah, even though she had already been given the Christian name of Matilda before that time. While she was there, she was a fast learner and excelled in her studies, but was really, really homesick. And like her mother many years before, she, in the middle of the night, stole or found an abandoned canoe and started paddling home. Of course, she was all by herself. And so she's 13, 14 years old at the time. And she did make it about 5 miles before she went to shore and fell asleep, and the search party found her and brought her back to Port Simpson, which is there where the Simpsons were living. By this time, the churches had really, and this would be a whole nother lecture of just how the churches had divided up Alaska and stuff, but they were also gaining great influence and having influence over what family decisions were being made. And so in exchange for the Methodists who were raising Matilda to return her to Wrangell, where she clearly wanted to go back home to, Snook had to agree to enroll her in the McFarland school that was in Wrangell. And he did that. So she returned home and joined that school, which was then a boarding school, but she was at least at home. Soon after that, Dr. Hall Young from Wrangell started talking to the Reverend Sheldon Jackson, who was made aware they were just corresponding, writing letters back and forth. And Reverend Jackson was made aware that Tillie was growing into be a girl of great promise who was good with children and wanted to be a teacher. And so what the missionaries and the churches would do is keep an eye out for Native children who would have certain skills or desires to do certain types of work. And teachers were certainly high on the list for especially somebody who was now, as Tillie was, bilingual, both Tlingit and English. And then when she was in Wrangell, again at McFarland, she was also, and this was how she used her bilingualness, bilingual abilities to really help build some bridges. She started translating sermons for Dr. Young to on the night before, a couple days before his sermon on Sunday. They would get together, and he would say what his sermon was going to be, and then she would be able to translate it into Tlingit on Sunday. So, and this is a story that I actually grew up listening to and hearing throughout my childhood as well. It's just a really funny story. And for those of us, because this audience, I think, is all of you all are from Southeast or familiar with Southeast, so you'll hopefully understand the humor in this story as well. When Dr. Young, and I'll just read it, Dr. Young asked her again, several stories at that time had come down to the present in the Paul family, which I grew up with. And Dr. Young was getting ready to preach about the Great Flood, which is a story in the Bible, and asked Tillie later what she thought of it. Tillie did not answer at first. Dr. Young asked her again, and she told him that the story of 40 days and 40 nights of flood almost wiping out the human race would be difficult for her people to believe because it rained often and for that long where she lived and had not yet caused a flood of those proportions. I don't believe Young ever heard what her substitute sermon was. So who knows how she translated that story. And but it went on, but that was a pretty funny story. All right, then when Tillie was 16, she was still at the McFarland School, and she met and fell in love with Louis Francis Paul, who was a Tlingit French Canadian who spoke both Tlingit and French and was a Christian, like Tillie had become. Lewis agreed to ask Snook to, anyway, they fell in love, they courted. About a year later, they decided they wanted to get married. And Louis, at Tillie's insistence, she asked Louis to go talk to Sook about the marriage and get permission, which he agreed to do. And, but Louis said that he had given up the old Tlingit ways, and that he did not agree to offer gifts, which was the Tlingit traditional ways. Snook agreed to the marriage, but was saddened with loss of tradition, and they married anyway in 1882. So, so again, this is, and I'm telling some of these stories just to show the bridge and the transitions that were happening at the time. Okay, so, and they were truly in love. This was a marriage that was not arranged. The two of them had met. They really wanted to start a life together and did so. They were both active in the Presbyterian Church, and it was the church who then deployed them as missionaries to Klukwan, which was up north. For those of you who may not be from here, is up near Haines. And this marriage produced 3 sons. Samuel Kendall was the first, and he let's see, after he was born, and I believe he was born up in Klukwan or in that area, Lewis's family, who still practiced Tlingit traditional ways, was still feeling a little bit of shame, family shame, because no gifts had been given to Tillie's family when the marriage happened. So they had a canoe built that was then delivered to and bestowed on Snook and his family. So that at least that, it's not really a debt, but that gift giving was complete. Then after that was done, then their second son was born, William Lewis. And it was at this time, soon after William was born, they're still up in the area of Klukwan. And Louis and Samuel Saxman and another young Tlingit man were sent out to scout for a new missionary, a new church site in the area. And it wasn't too far that they were going to go. And that's when tragedy hit. And again, I'm just going to read a portion out of this. And no, I'm not getting any royalties from this book. I just think it's a great book and some great life stories. So here is what happened. These 3 young men who, and they were family men. So Saxman, Samuel Saxman, Louis Paul, and the young native woman, young native man who it's unclear what his name was. There's some reports about what his name was, but we're not sure. Set out to look at the site and never returned from this trip. Search parties went out in January 1887, and some wreckage of the boat was found. Although there was some talk of a storm, the weather in the area is thought to have been clear, and the tragedy defied explanation. Some of the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of the men led to the conclusion of possible foul play. Fred Paul, who is my uncle, who's, well, I can say who Fred Paul is later, writes that to this day, the family finds it hard to believe that a man of Lewis's vigor, training, and knowledge of the land could have been caught in a storm. So it still remains a mystery what happened to those 3 men. And again, that's a whole nother lecture about the history of what was happening. But again, I always find it interesting that there was still what some believe or view as a peaceful transition from Tlingit old ways or native old ways to white man Christianity ways to be a peaceful transition. It wasn't always. And there was pockets of and incidences of violence and unexplained incidences, and this was certainly one of them. Now, at the time of this disappearance, when Louis Paul disappeared and never returned, Tillie Paul was pregnant with her third child, who was shortly thereafter born, and he was named Louis Francis after his father. Tillie returned to Sitka at the invitation of, for those in Zoom land, this is a picture of Tillie Paul and her son, William. I don't think we have any pictures of Louis. Well, I mean, we have pictures of Louis Paul, but I don't think we have pictures of Tillie and Louis Paul, the son, Louis. But this was William Paul. Tillie returned to Sitka at the invitation of Sheldon Jackson. At this time, she had 3 young children. Both her husband and Snook had died, and she had no close relatives. This is when she came and returned to Sitka here. Tillie lived here in Sitka for 17 years, teaching, nursing, housekeeping, and was known as a peacemaker. She stayed involved with the church, helped to bridge gaps between the new and the old ways. And she raised her 3 boys. Samuel went on to, this again, shortly after both fathers, both Saxman and Paul had died. Samuel, Tillie's oldest, was actually sent to go live and be raised by Samuel Saxman's widow. And I don't recall her name, but, and they lived for a time down south in the Portland area and then moved back east. Samuel was sent back to and attended the Carlisle boarding Indian school and graduated from there, and then came to Alaska and visited a couple of times, but always returned to the East Coast and never returned to Alaska full time again, and started a family and who all have lived back east. William, her second son, was also sent to Carlisle, and he took business courses and law school and became a lawyer, and was known to be the first elected Alaska Native elected to the Alaska State Legislature, and was an active leader and founder of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. Louis, her third son, who also went to Carlisle, was active and a leader in A&B as well, and was schooled in journalism. Both William and Louis were commercial fishermen. For a time, they lived in Petersburg, which is where I live now. And it was actually in Petersburg where they started the Alaska Fisherman publication, which was known during that time, early days of Alaska Native Brotherhood, to be the publication of the Brotherhood, and was strongly advocated for fishing rights, civil rights, and equality in education and pay. So they went on to do lots of good things. In the meantime, Tillie remained active here in Sitka and was involved with the New Covenant League, which was, well, I don't know very much about that, but she also became involved with the Alaska Native Sisterhood and was a leader in that. And through both these organizations, she continued to combine some of the Native traditional ways that were not being ridiculed by the dominant forces coming in, and the new government and civil rights. So she was becoming active in that. In 1903, her 3 boys are pretty much grown and off on their own, and she returns to Wrangell at the request of the Presbyterian Church. And she's sent there to Wrangell to help mend some conflicts that were happening. And it was in Wrangell, and again, this was her original homeland. And so once she was there, and she was really happy to actually go back to Wrangell. And while there, shortly thereafter, she met William Tamaree, who was also Tlingit and a French Canadian, and they soon married. Now it's interesting, and I'm actually, and I'll tell you the chronology, the ancestry here in a minute, but William Tamaree is actually my great grandfather, not Louis Paul, because I'm not from the Paul side, I'm from the Tamaree side. And over the last 10 years, I've been trying to find out more information about William Tamaree, and there's hardly anything, but there's some really interesting things about him. Like Tillie, this marriage to Tillie was a second marriage for him. And Tillie had married a widow who was much older than he was, again, following Tlingit ways. He was a young Tlingit relative of a widow who needed somebody to help with hunting and taking care of the household. And they did not have any children. But when they married, he took her name. So his original name was Betty, Betti, and when they married, he took the name of Tamaree. So, I really find that interesting. Okay, while in Wrangell, okay. Now this is the best story, and it's going to be the last story that I tell. There's lots of stories you can tell about Tillie Paul, but okay. While in Wrangell, now this is early 1900s, right? Women can't vote, natives can't vote for sure, but men could vote, and there was a dispute whether or not native men could vote. So. And Charlie Jones was, remember, Chief Shakes has already died, and Charlie Jones, even though I don't think he held the title of Chief Shakes, he was the next in line if that was going to continue. But again, there's a disruption in Tlingit ways, so it's hard. So I'm just going to read this. It was in Wrangell that she and Charlie James, the probable successor to Wrangell's Chief Shakes, and the father of the woman who was to become son Louis Paul's wife. I know it gets very, you have to listen very carefully to that, but it was going to be, so anyway, they had family ties, or were going to have family ties. Well, I picked the wrong folks. Anyway. Charlie Jones, there was an election happening. Charlie Jones went down to the polling place to vote. He's an upstanding citizen of Wrangell. He owns property. He's lived there his entire life. He's over 21, blah, blah, blah. He goes down to vote and they turn him away. They say, you cannot vote because you're native. He goes and tells Tillie Paul this. And by this time, William Paul, her second son, is already a lawyer, right? And he goes and tells Tillie that they won't let him vote. She grabs his arm, at least this is the story I hear when I grew up, grabs his arm, they march down the street back into the polling place, and she insists that Charlie Jones be allowed to vote. And they both are arrested. He's arrested for illegal voting, and she's arrested for it, encouraging or aiding somebody to illegally vote. And in comes William Paul to defend the both of them. And they do actually get thrown in jail. And we have seen the indictments and the grand jury and the charging papers and the whole thing. William Paul, who was, I think, living in Juneau at the time, had to fly in to defend the both of them. And of course, they both got off. But it was William Paul then went to trial and started using, and it was used for quite a while. And the argument was that Charlie Jones was not civilized, therefore he could not vote. Well, how do you prove that you're civilized? So, you own property, you know English, you've given up your native ways, and then this is the toilet paper defense. You use toilet paper in your house, so that became the toilet paper defense. which is what William Paul was known for quite a bit. All right, so it was a long time. Voting rights, as you know, was a long, hard battle and took many years, and in some cases still is still carrying on. All right. William Tamaree and Tillie Paul Tamaree had 3 daughters. Their first child, a baby, died in infancy. Their second child, Gladys, grew to be in her either late teens or early 20s and died from some blood infection. I'm not sure if it was meningitis or something. But she never married and never had any children. And then their third child was Francis. I forget Francis's middle name, but Francis, who was given the nickname of Skip, who was my grandmother. And Francis Tamaree was sent to nursing school in New York City and actually stayed with Samuel Paul's family while she went to nursing school there. And back then, in those days, there was public health systems set up. And once she graduated from nursing school, she was then deployed, almost as if it was a military organization, to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, because that was Alaska and she was Alaskan. So even though it was far, far away from her homeland of Wrangell, and that's where she met my grandfather, George Shepherd. Okay. I just want to end with the 2 places that Tillie Paul Tamaree lived the longest or the most and spent the most time was Wrangell and Sitka. And here on the Sheldon, and the 17 years that she lived here in Sitka as an adult, she did a lot of things, and it was almost all around the Presbyterian Church and the Sheldon, what's now the Sheldon Jackson campus. There's a house, and I don't know which way I'm going to point, but I think it's that way. There's a house that's right over on that side street that goes up and cuts up to the main road. And it had been originally the nursing quarters for the nurses who came in. And it's now been, it sort of got run down and has been now renovated and is now the Tillie Paul Tamaree Manor and is being used as a hostel. So I'm going to go through real quickly. This is, look at the big one there. This is Tillie on the far right. And so you can see she grew to be really pretty old, I think with 93. And on the far left is William Paul, and I'm not sure who the baby is. This is her at the McFarland School. And my cousin Ben Paul told me which number she was, and I forget. But it was all Native children at that school, all being taught to speak English and learn to be civilized. Here's the A and B days. Now, everybody's dressed up in their regalia or ANS Huganas. Huh? Yep. So Harriet's going to recognize people in there. Now, this is an interesting picture. Can anybody spot Tillie Paul in there? She's standing up against the wall. She doesn't have regalia. She's wearing a white dress and almost looks ghostly in a way, except you have to remember that in ANS, one of the things that ANS does wear for gatherings is a white, they dress in white. So that's one of those. And so for some reason, everybody's in either blanket or the kugenas and she's dressed in white, but it almost looks a little ghostly back there.
The one there looks like Mrs. Persons.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Walter's overalls.
And Tillie is seated on the far right in this one. And this again is one of the Temperist and Presbyterian church gatherings of sorts. And then this is I love this picture. This is William Tamaree and my auntie Joan Bejo when she was a little girl in Wrangell. And that's it. So I didn't have very many pictures, but I wanted to share those. So let me stop sharing. There we go. All right. And I think I left a few minutes. Of course, as you can see, I do ad lib. I fulfilled that promise that I made at the very beginning here. and any questions or any other stories or comments?
When did she die?
1950. Oops. I know my 1955, August 1955, and my grandma Frances Tamaree Shepherd died in 1957, same year I was born. So very close together.
Yes, she certainly had a long range of.
Yep, she
changes.
saw a lot. Yeah.
And then William Paul changed the direction of A and B in 1929 in Louis Paul.
He did.
So they said that they weren't going to worry so much about being civilized and going into the Western. They were going to go after the land that was belonged to the people.
Yep. So there's a whole chapter in this book on right after Tillie's chapter. There's a whole chapter on William Paul.
Yeah. I remember him. I was a little girl then in Wrangell.
Yep.
And I was up at the balcony in the A and B hall. Marge Bradley Bird and I were washing the dishes, and the mothers were in there eating, and Brotherhood was downstairs.
Mhm.
And he was in the middle of the floor. He said he was talking to A and B. And I ran over to the balcony, Marge and I, and we were listening. He was telling them, don't go corporation, he said. Only a few people will get rich as a lawyer, he said.
Yep.
Put the land in tribal trust. And I was only 10 or 12, so I didn't understand what corporations were.
That's right.
I know now, but then he also said something about the capital payments,
Mhm.
and he was crying, and Marge and I were listening to him. I didn't know how famous, what he
Yeah.
did for our native people. And my grandfather's just Williamson and James Johnson, they were known all that.
Mhm.
Growing up between Co-op and Wrangell, I look back now, that was good, very good.
Yep. Thank you, Harriet. Yes.
You know what the dates were that she worked here at school?
Well, she moved back here, I said in 1900. No, she went back to Wrangell in 1903. So I don't know. I know that she was, I mean, I could look it up here. I'm sure it's in here.
No, and I can do that as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's in
I
here,
kind of
what
want to
dates.
switch a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I was looking at the weaving. That yellow that you use, is that a natural dye or? Yellow?
Well, this yellow is called Peeps
Okay.
and it's commercially made.
Okay.
And, but some of my weaver friends do hand dye, and some are actually experimenting and trying to bring back some of the natural traditional dyes through wolf moss and mushrooms and lots of different
Another
things.
question about the dyes. I understand that you got a really big grant over there to study the dyes, and I'm just wondering if you published anything about that.
Not that I know of, but you can get hold of the State Museum in Juneau, and that's where that research is happening. Yeah.
You know anything about the totem that was in the last picture?
I don't. And you know, William Tamaree was a carver, and I'm not sure, and I'm gonna ask my auntie. I'm not sure if that's one that he carved or not. I actually just got a copy of this picture. So, I'm not on the share screen anymore. So I just got a copy of it, but it's signed by my Auntie Joan. So, so it was a picture of her standing there in front of it with him. So I'm gonna, yeah, I'll find out. Yeah. Was there any questions on Zoom?
No, thank you.
Hey,
Are all those people, other people who are listed, are they attending?
Yeah.
Lisa Baconin.
Mhm.
I know Mary Sue. I do too. That's why I was like, whoa, Mary Sue's there.
So.
so you guys could, so you somebody's saying hi to you, Lisa and Mary, if you want to put on your cameras and wave.
So how many presentations will you make?
Well, you know, I looked at my calendar and there's 3 on the calendar, but I only know about 2. So I'll have to ask Jackie what the 3rd one is. So the other one that I'm gonna do is a Raven's Tail. I'm gonna talk about Raven's Tail, and maybe you might be interested in coming to that one. Talking about Raven's Tail and Chilkat, and I wanna just explain the difference between the 2 and the evolution of Chilkat that came out of Raven's Tail. Raven's Tail was first, and then Chilkat, and then Raven's Tail almost died out completely.
Yeah.
That's the talk next week.
That's talk next week. So come back for that one.
That's a question. Well, she was, while you were telling her history, there probably wasn't much of the native art going on during that time. Kind of came back.
Yeah, some of it has come back. Some of it died out or came close to dying out. Some of it went underground too. But then there was other art forms that flourished because it became an economic endeavor. Tourists were coming in. Basket making was a huge source of income for Tlingit families up and down the Southeast Alaska, and in British Columbia and Haida Gwaii, what's now called Haida Gwaii. And so that's a whole nother lecture too.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank